Good afternoon, my beautiful people. I'm Sotadeology. In today's video, we're going to dissect Sotadeology Lecture 10, the complex system of universe. Now, there is something I want us to briefly look at. I want us to look at this time energy wave model. We're going to actually use this complex wave, which is this E to I filter, to illustrate the cosine theta plus I sine theta that we have right here. So now you can see this E to the high theta as the complex wave, and then when that is being unpacked, we have the cosine theta, which is the real wave, and then we have suspension of imaginary wave to it, which is I sine theta. So now, but before I explain this further, I want us to briefly look at this time energy wave model in order to unpack the reality of the complex system. Now, there is, when you look at this strong wave conveying trajectory that suspends the weak conveying force, the value that actually gives us this 5.7 times 10 raised power 48 is this. The constant value of the universe is 2.5 times 10 raised power 39. So now, if we just temporarily remove this 0.5 such that we have 2 times 10 raised power 39, so we can just say that the output of this worth, if we now tag this output of this suspension trajectory, if we tag it 2, we know that it's going to have, this is the action of time trajectory, then it must have a reaction of energy trajectory, which will be 2 as well. So if we tag this 2 and tag this 2, definitely the total input of this equilateral triangle will have to be 4. So what do I mean by that? So it means that this side we target to, this side is tagged to, this side is tagged to, so the total times trajectory, which is instant, which is vertical here, will be 4. Now, why must we have it like that? Now, this times trajectory must have a reacting trajectory in form of energy, and that will be the same thing as this. So we have it to be 2, 2. Now, the instant trajectory of time, we have to cover for the O2, which is going to be the total input. And so you can see that the first half, which is at this center, will be 2. And then the second half will be 2. So when we sum that together, we have 4. So basically, this is applicable even in the law of conservation of energy. So the total input must be times 2 of the output result, because the output result we have action and reaction. So basically, with that, we now have the clear picture of this equilateral system that we have right embedded in time energy wave model. But now, let's say when you look at this, you can see that the trajectory is from this arbitrary suspension of classical mechanics to the arbitrary suspension of quantum mechanics. And also we have the trajectory right from we have another trajectory like this. But now, instead of having it right from the arbitrary suspension of classical mechanics to the quantum, to that of the quantum mechanics, let's say we now peg it to this central point. We peg our value right there. Now, the total sum, which is going to be the worth, when it reaches the classical level, it will extend the classical boundary. It will extend it as far as what can contain the full worth of that input. So it will not break it. So you can see that there is enough room at the classical level to accommodate the total full worth of the input. But when it gets to this quantum level, that input worth will be shrinked within the available space at the quantum level, which is the half of the total worth of the input. So the two extensive worth of that two that this quantum mechanics can accommodate will be shrinked right inside the space. So here now we can see the compacted nature of the quantum mechanics relative to the expansive nature of the classical mechanics. So there you can see that the complex system at classical mechanics is different from the complex system at quantum mechanics. Now that we have that picture, then the moment we now include this 0.5, and then the moment we include the worth of this m, we know there is possibility for us to have spontaneous symmetry breaking, and by having that, the time's trajectory will be beyond this arbitrary suspension to connect to the positron. So what do I mean by that? There are some instances that one will have to make constant or you nullify. For instance, when you look at a human being, you will not be able to see the infrared light or the infrared radiation that every human radiates, you understand? But if you are able to get glasses that can reveal the infrared radiation, you'll be able to see it. So the infrared radiation of every human being is insignificant at classical level, and so we can just get rid of that. But that infrared radiation is so significant at quantum level because it will be so magnified and it must be accounted for at quantum level. So now that we can just temporarily get rid of the dot 5 for us to be able to get the clear picture of the complex system at classical level and quantum level, you understand? And so by the time we now put the 0.5 and put the mass worth, then we'll be able to see the possibility of spontaneous symmetry breaking that we connect to the positron. So that is the brief explanation about the complex system at classical level versus the complex system at quantum level. So now let's get back to this wave. Now there's something I want you to know. I want you to look at this particular e to the I theta as the complex wave, and that complex wave comprises the real wave and imaginary wave. So when we extract the real wave, which is going to be cosine theta, which is going to be cos theta plus I sine theta. The I sine theta is the imaginary wave, cos theta is the real wave. So now, what I want you to pay attention to is the real wave. When we now extract the real wave and extract the imaginary wave will be suspended to the real wave. It will actually be how am I going to put it? It will be suspended. It will be an offset version to this real wave, to the real wave. So what I'm trying to say is that when this real wave reaches the central 0 point, the imaginary wave will have its own peak at that point where the real wave is at the central 0 point. Imaginary wave has its own peak energy wave at the classical level. So the moment the real wave reaches this point, reaches the 0 point here, then the imaginary wave will be at its minimum peak wave. It will be at its minimum level. So imaginary wave will be at minimum wave when the real wave has its is at the beginning of its energized phase. Then when the real wave is at the lowest energy potential, that is at low, where it's supposed not to have energy at all, then the imaginary wave will be at the peak of its own energy. So definitely you see that there is imaginary wave serves as a reserved energy vault for real wave. So imaginary wave serves as a reserved energy vault for real wave. So when you look at it like that, then you'll be able to understand the kind of phenomenon that usually propel energy even when the real energy is at the lowest energy state. So there is a reserved energy that could be used by real wave to propel it further, and then another reserved energy to propel it whichever way that the real energy might want to go. So that is that. The complex system is very difficult to analyze, but basically this complex wave is the same thing as being static and undulating. So the line that we have here, the vertical line trajectory, is a typical example of a complex wave. So it's a kind of wave that is not directional. It is static but undulating. It has some level of energy. You understand? So it is unlike the real wave that has its amplitude point and then the lowest point. So the real wave, we could have a real wave that will propagate outwards and then have a real wave that propagates inwards. So real wave that we have is synonymous to the expanding phase of the cosmological space, which here you have a field, or should I call it a wave? It's more or less like you have a wave that propagates outwards or field that propagates outwards. And in the black hole, we have fields that propagates inwards. So that is that. So now let's get to this particular part. Now, here we want to use mathematics to drill down into the black hole. So we want to get the real fact. We want to get the happenings in the black hole. So now before we do that, when you look at the complex system, it's more or less like having an inverted equilateral triangle to an upright equilateral triangle. So now in the complex system, there are three major things that we need to really consider. We need to consider complex system integration. We need to consider flipping mechanism. Then we need to consider quantum entanglement. Now, the moment we have this connection to this from this inverted equilateral triangle to this equilateral triangle, we're going to have instantiation of worth in form of positive charge relatively to negative charge. So, and that signifies the quantum entanglement phenomenon. So now the flipping of positive charge to negative charge, we can liken that to flipping mechanism. But then the complex system integration will have to be beyond this particular one. It will travel beyond to connect to the complex reality, which it's a phase where we have the stacking of the inverted equilateral triangles. So once that is being integrated, then we're going to have what is known as consciousness, and then we're going to have other system from chaotic system. So there is possibility for us to have other emergence from chaotic system, and by having the full complex system, we will be able to realize that. So now what I want us to do, basically, there is something we need to know. This complex system has to do with dimensional structure of the universe as well, because it's more or less like 2D system, but it's a kind of 2D numbering system that has a trait of 3D in itself. So now, don't forget that when you have curvature of 2D, now let's look at this. The point where we have curvature of 2D here, at the point where there is curvature of 2D, that has transcended into the 3D, because there is no way you can have curvature of 2D without elevating it to 3D. So 2D has some flavor of 3D right inside of itself, and the moment it's able to connect to the higher dimension, which is 3D, then the full reality of 2D will be ascertained. And same thing is applicable to 3D. 3D we have to transcend to the 4D for 3D to really get its own full potential and its full reality. So that is that. By the virtue of curvature, 2D will automatically be transited into the 3D. And then by the virtue of equilateral triangle, which has three other rotational system, and then which has three symmetric lines, by virtue of that, we have that trait of 3D right inside the 2D. So the complex system has to do with dimensional structure of the universe. It has to do with quantum entanglement. It has to do with the flipping mechanism, and it has to do with the complex system integration. So now, when you look at this chart, the one we have here, on this real axis, we have real number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, real number. But on this imaginary axis, we have combination of real and imaginary number. So I, 2i, 3i, 4i, and so on. So we can represent that to be a plus bi, and that is the complex number. So complex system comprises of real number and imaginary number. So complex system comprises of real phenomenon and imaginary phenomenon. So now let's look at how we can use the formula of everything to go deep into the black hole for us to see what is happening right there. Application of formula of everything. So in this case, we're going to use the electron's mass, which is 9.109 times 10 raised power minus 31 kilogram. Now this is the formula of everything. By the time we put, this is the constant speed of the universe, which is this capital U. We have that here. The M is going to be electron's mass, and then plus 4. We multiply that with the electron's mass, and that will give us this particular value. So this value that we have is 2,277,250,000 kilograms. That is the classical mass. So now we have to use this classical mass, because solution will have to come right from the classical level. I said that the total worth of the 4 input will be accommodated at the classical level, and that simply means that the solution for quantum system, quantum mechanics will come from the classical system. Should pause it. So now we then have to use the solution must come right from the classical level, because the total forward of time trajectory is accommodated at classical level, unlike at quantum level where it gets shrinked right inside the compacted space. So now we will use this classical mass word. So we put that in the formula, and then we have this as our solution. So now we need to extend this word, this solution, in standard form. We extend it, we elongate it by standard form standard. So when we elongate that, we're going to have this value, and then we'll realize that the mass this worth, the quantum worth, is suspended at 30 seconds. So we then need to manually annihilate the suspended zero. To do that, we're going to have this value, and then we have this as our result. Now when you look at what we have 9.109 times 10 raised power minus 32, which is smaller than 9.109 times 10 raised power minus 31, which is the actual electron's mass. The reason we have this is because the time trajectory is one-way traffic. So we use the quantum mass worth of electron to get the classical counterpart. If we're to use this classical counterpart to get the quantum mass worth again, it will have gone through the quantum suspension, and it will resort to radiation, and that will then resort to this decaying effect that we have. So now we have that decaying effect. We know that by going into the black hole, we're going to have that decaying effect. So every object that enters into the black hole will experience a kind of decaying effect. That is what this is telling us. Now let's look at the second result phase. So now we put this output, generated output, as input into our formula. So we have this to be the answer. Now you can see that the slight decaying effect at quantum level has resulted to big decaying effect at classical level. So we have almost 2 billion worth of classical mass being decayed. So instead of getting 2,277,250,000 kilograms, we now have 277,725,000 dot 00. We have 703 kilograms. So now we can actually get rid of these dot zeros, because it is insignificant for us to track deep into the black hole. And then take note that the value that we have here, we have 7 after the dot, we have 70 before we have actual value 3. So that is similar to what we have right here. We have 7 zeros after the dot. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So now you can see that it's taking us down to the core of the black hole. So now the second result phase, by supplying this generated output into the formula, we now have this as our result. Then we need to nullify this value at the end of behind this dot. So we only have 277,727,000 kilograms. So we put that in our formula. By putting that in our formula, we have this as our result. When we elongate that by standard form, we're going to discover that the suspension is 31st. So right here, the trajectory has gone back. It's more now. This has proved what I said concerning the suspension that we have at quantum level. the suspension that we have in the black hole, which is neutron stars suspension, we only have compacted gravitational field right here, and that generates mass what? That serves as resistance for that decaying effect. Now you can see what we have here. So you see that here, you can see that we have flipped system that is resisting that decaying effect. So now when we manually annihilate the suspended zeros, guess what we have? We have this. We have 1.1109 times 10 raised power minus 31 kilogram. Now, the power of electrons mass what has been restored, but the real worth, the real integer base worth is being decayed. Can you sense something right there? The first result that we got, we realized that the power's worth is being decayed while the base worth is intact. But now here, the base worth is decayed and then the power is restored as being instant. So we will explore what that means as we progress. So now, third resource phase, we want to now get what is actually happening. So now, here, we put that generated quantum worth in our formula. Then we get this. Guess what we get? That same worth. But this time, there is no dot to it. So we have this. And when we put that inside our formula again, then we have that same result as what we had in the second result phase. So it means that it has gotten to a point where we now have infinite loops. So now, what is this telling us? Now, what is being discovered right inside the black hole, right inside the core part of the black hole in the singularity, is synonymous to the quasar effect. So the swinging forth and back of the quasar signal is what we have discovered at the core of black hole singularity. So definitely the swinging forth and back of the quasar is so fast that it maintains the singularity at the center, at its own center. And so that could even serve if the quasar forth and back swinging is properly dissected. We can just use that for the measurement of time, because the time must be explored to the point where the singularity is being sustained, as we have, objects being far apart from each other in the space. So if we can explore the rate at which the swinging of quasar forth and back, if we can explore that and get that rate, we can use that for the measure of time. So now, the discovery at the third result phase, the whole system resorts to an infinite loops. So now, what is the conclusion? The conclusion is, but before we get to the real complex system, what real complex system is, there is this particular problem that mass energy equivalence could not solve. And that is what we have been able to solve with this formula of everything. So the problem of mass energy equivalence is not completely solved, or rather not solved at all. The supposed solution is meant to ensure the relativistic stationary point of bodies that are far apart in space by the virtue of symmetric constancy of mass energy conservation. Such solution is not visible in a relativistic system constrained by light speed. In Newtonian physics, force field like gravity acts instantly across a distance. So bodies separated by such distances can act and react upon one another without any issue. But in electromagnetism, information and energy are transmitted in a local retarded version via disturbances in the field themselves. Hence, the action of one body isn't simultaneously compensated by the reaction of another body. That is the problem. So therefore, the positron is situated in higher dimension by relativity to lower dimension of electron for its worth to be materialized at instant interconnectivity. Now that is the solution that we have by applying formula of everything, and that is the reality of the universe. That is the reality of the complex system. So the complex system is a system in which the positron is situated in the higher dimension relatively to the low or lower dimension of its electron. And so the moment that positron is discovered, the worth of electron will be known. So the worth of electron will be known. So what do I mean by that? Now when you look at this, I want us to look at this. When you look at this region is the nucleus that we have right here. But by getting to this place, the mass worth of electron is undefined unless it is connected to this positron. So it gets defined at the point of contact with this positron, and that is quantum entanglement for you. So the charge of this will determine what the charge of electron will be. So positron worth will determine what the electron's worth will be. And if it is the electron that is being contacted, and that will determine what the charge of positron will be. So that is the whole thing about the reality of the universe. Then it turns out that there is a constant radiation of quasar signal at the core of the black hole. There is a constant transmission of quasar signal at the core of black hole, and that is the reality. That is the reality. So it's more or less like there is pulsation. So universe has pulsation, like universe is breathing. So now basically when we look at the whole thing, when you look at the formula of everything, which is a linear solution, we now have emergence of pattern. We have emergence of order system from a linear solution. So complex random patterns emerge from linear solution. So that is that about this video. I believe this video is quite informative. I will put a link to my research publication in the description below. You can click on that and explore it further. Don't hesitate to subscribe to my channel so as to be notified for the subsequent upload. Thank you.